A new beginning. The early morning sun glinted off the dew-kissed grass as Elena Marshall stepped off the city bus, clutching a worn leather bag close to her side. The sprawling gates of the Waltham estate towered above her, imposing yet alluring. Elena's heart raced with a mix of anxiety and determination. This was her first day as a housekeeper at the estate of Malcolm Waltham, one of the wealthiest men in the state. The job was a lifeline, a chance to leave behind the weight of years spent struggling to make ends meet. Elena adjusted her plain navy coat and smoothed down her skirt as she approached the grand iron gates. She'd heard whispers about the Waltham family's mysterious ways, but none of that mattered. This was her shot at stability, and she wasn't going to let it slip away. The gates creaked open as if they sensed her presence, and a tall, distinguished man in a tailored black suit stepped forward. His silver hair was perfectly combed, and he carried an air of authority that made Elena straighten her posture instinctively. "Miss Marshall?" he inquired, his tone warm but professional. "Yes, that's me," she replied, her voice steady despite the butterflies in her stomach. "Welcome to Waltham Estate. I'm Mr. Howard, the butler. Please follow me." Elena nodded and followed him down the long cobblestone driveway. The estate was magnificent, sprawling gardens lined with neatly trimmed hedges, fountains that sparkled in the sunlight, and a mansion that looked as though it belonged in a storybook. It was worlds away from the modest apartment she had shared with her sister. As they entered the mansion, Elena's breath caught. The foyer was a symphony of marble, crystal, and gold. A chandelier the size of her old living room hung from the ceiling, its light reflecting off the polished floors. "This way, Miss Marshall," Mr. Howard said, leading her through the labyrinth of corridors. He explained her duties in detail, pointing out rooms and schedules, but Elena found it hard to focus. Her eyes kept drifting to the opulence surrounding her. Paintings that seemed to watch her every move, antique furniture that spoke of unimaginable wealth, and shelves of books that hinted at the family's long history. Finally, they reached the servant quarters, a modest but cozy area tucked away from the main living spaces. Mr. Howard gestured toward a small, neatly made bed and a wardrobe. "This will be your room," he said. "Please familiarize yourself with the estate over the next few days. And one more thing," he added, his tone softening. "The Waltham family values privacy above all else. Always remember your role and your place." Elena nodded, understanding the unspoken warning. As the day wore on, Elena began her duties, dusting, polishing, and tidying the countless rooms of the mansion. She worked diligently, eager to prove herself. It was in one of the children's bedrooms that her life would change forever. The room was vibrant and cheerful, with shelves lined with toys and books. A framed photograph on the bedside table caught Elena's eye. She froze. In the photo was a young boy with bright eyes and a dimpled smile. Her heart stopped. It couldn't be. Her hand trembled as she picked up the frame. The boy in the picture was unmistakably her son, Aaron. The same Aaron she had buried 5 years ago after a tragic accident had shattered her world. Elena staggered back, her mind racing. The boy had a birthmark on his right wrist, a small crescent moon shape that she could never forget. She had seen it every day of his short life. And now, here it was, staring back at her from the photograph. How was this possible? "Is everything all right, Miss Marshall?" Mr. Howard's voice startled her. She quickly set the frame back down and turned, forcing a smile. "Yes, just everything is so beautiful. It's overwhelming," she said, hoping her voice didn't betray her shock. Mr. Howard gave her a polite nod and left the room. As soon as he was gone, Elena's knees gave out, and she sank onto the bed. Tears welled up in her eyes as memories of Aaron flooded her mind. His laughter, his first steps, the way he used to call her Mama in his soft, sweet voice. The weight of the discovery was almost too much to bear. Could it be that her son was alive? If so, how had he ended up here, in the care of the Waltham family? And why had she been told he was dead? Determined to find answers, Elena wiped her tears and steeled herself. She couldn't let her emotions cloud her judgment. If Aaron, or the boy who looked exactly like him, was truly here, she needed to uncover the truth without raising suspicion. That evening, as the mansion grew quiet, Elena found herself drawn to the gardens. She wandered aimlessly until she heard laughter, pure, joyous laughter that made her heart ache. She followed the sound and saw him. A boy, no older than 7, was chasing butterflies near a row of roses. His dark curls bounced as he ran, and his laughter rang out like a melody. It was him. There was no doubt. "Hello," the boy called out, noticing her standing nearby. He waved enthusiastically. Elena's throat tightened, and she struggled to find her voice. "Hello there," she managed, her voice trembling. "I'm Leo," he said, running up to her with a wide grin. "Are you the new housekeeper?" "Yes," she said, her heart breaking as she studied his face. He had Aaron's eyes, Aaron's smile, even Aaron's dimples. "Do you want to see my butterfly collection?" he asked eagerly. "I'd love to, but I have work to finish," Elena replied, her voice soft. "Okay," he said, looking a little disappointed. "Maybe next time." As he ran off, Elena stood frozen, her mind spinning. She had to uncover the truth, no matter what it took. Why was her son, or someone so much like him, here? And what secrets were the Waltham family hiding? With a mix of fear and determination, Elena made a silent vow. She would find out the truth about Leo, even if it meant risking everything. Shadows of the past. The moon cast its pale light over the sprawling Waltham estate as Elena sat on the edge of her bed, staring at the photograph she had managed to sneak from the child's room earlier that evening. The boy's smile haunted her. Every line of his face, every gleam in his eyes, was an echo of her son Aaron. Her fingers traced the edges of the frame as a storm of emotions brewed within her. She hadn't slept since her discovery earlier that day. How could she? The boy she had mourned, the son she had buried, seemed to be alive, living under this roof as someone else's child. She needed answers. She needed proof. And she couldn't let fear stop her. Taking a deep breath, Elena tucked the photo into her bag. Tonight, when the household was silent and the world felt still, she would begin her search. She'd learned during her tour of the estate that the Waltham family kept meticulous records, and the butler, Mr. Howard, had mentioned that many of them were stored in the East Wing study. That would be her starting point. The mansion was eerily quiet as Elena crept through its vast hallways. Her sensible shoes barely made a sound on the polished marble floors, but her heart pounded so loudly she was sure it would betray her. She paused at the entrance to the East Wing, glancing over her shoulder to ensure no one had followed her. The study door was closed, but she had seen Mr. Howard lock it earlier in the day. She reached into her pocket and pulled out the small hairpin she'd brought with her. Years of living on the edge of desperation had taught her more than just housekeeping skills. It took longer than she expected, but finally, the lock clicked open. She slipped inside and quietly closed the door behind her. The room smelled of leather and faint cigar smoke. Rows of shelves held leather-bound books, some with gilded titles that glinted in the dim light. In the corner stood a heavy mahogany desk, its surface neat and organized. Elena's hand shook as she approached the desk. She began opening drawers, methodically sorting through papers, ledgers, and files. Her pulse quickened when she came across a folder labeled Leonard Waltham, Adoption Records. She hesitated. This was it, the proof she had been searching for. Her hands trembled as she opened the folder, scanning its contents. The documents were in pristine condition, with official seals and signatures. They detailed the adoption of a boy named Leonard Waltham, age 2, from a private agency in another state. Her heart sank when she saw the listed birth date, March 21. It wasn't Aaron's birthday, but as she read further, her breath caught. The medical history included details about the boy's early development and mentioned a distinctive crescent-shaped birthmark on his right wrist. Tears filled her eyes as she flipped through the file. Included was a photograph of the boy taken shortly after the adoption. He looked frightened and confused, clutching a small stuffed elephant. Aaron's stuffed elephant. Her legs gave out, and she sank to the floor, clutching the folder to her chest. It was him. It had to be. No other explanation made sense. But why had she been told he was dead? Who had orchestrated this cruel deception? As the first light of dawn seeped through the curtains, Alina returned to her room, exhausted but determined. She carefully hid the adoption records under her mattress. Now that she had confirmation, the next step was to confront Malcolm Waltham himself. But she needed to tread carefully. A man of his power wouldn't take kindly to being accused of such a heinous act. Her thoughts were interrupted by a knock at her door. She quickly composed herself, smoothing her apron before opening it to find Mr. Howard standing there. "Miss Marshall," he said with his usual polite demeanor, "Mr. Waltham has requested your assistance in preparing for an upcoming dinner party. You'll find the details in the main kitchen." "Of course," Alina replied, her voice steady despite the turmoil inside her. She couldn't afford to raise suspicion. Not now. The day passed in a blur of preparations. Alina busied herself polishing silverware, arranging centerpieces, and ensuring every detail of the party was flawless. All the while, her mind raced with questions. If Leo, her Aaron, had been adopted by Malcolm Waltham, what had happened to lead to such a decision? And why had no one informed her? She couldn't shake the feeling that Mr. Howard knew more than he let on. The way he watched her, always polite, but with a sharp, assessing gaze, made her uneasy. She decided to test the waters. As they worked side by side in the dining room, she casually asked, "Mr. Howard, how long have you been with the Waltham family?" "Nearly 2 decades, he replied, not looking up from the silver platter he was polishing. "Why do you ask?" "You must have seen so much in that time," Alina said, keeping her tone light. "It must feel like they're your family." Mr. Howard finally looked at her, his expression unreadable. "The Walthams are a very private family, Miss Marshall. Loyalty and discretion are paramount." "Of course," Alina said quickly, but she noted the subtle warning in his tone. He was guarding something. Of that, she was certain. That evening, as the mansion came alive with the sounds of guests arriving for the dinner party, Alina's focus was on the boy. She couldn't help but steal glances at Leo as he interacted with the guests, his bright smile lighting up the room. He moved with an ease that broke her heart. He looked so at home here, so unaware of the truths that had been kept from him. But her resolve only grew stronger. No matter how much time had passed, no matter the obstacles, she would find a way to uncover the full truth and bring her son back to her. As the party wound down and the guests began to leave, Alina slipped away, heading for the garden. She needed air, needed space to think. She was startled to find Malcolm Waltham himself standing near the rose bushes, a glass of wine in hand. He turned when he heard her approach. "Miss Marshall," he said smoothly, his deep voice carrying an edge of curiosity. "What brings you out here?" Alina hesitated but then stepped forward. This was her chance. "I needed a moment to myself, sir," she said, choosing her words carefully. "Your home is overwhelming, in the best way, of course." Malcolm chuckled, his piercing gaze studying her. "It has that effect on people. But you seem different, Miss Marshall. Not many take the time to step away from the grandeur." She met his gaze, her heart pounding. Sometimes, stepping away helps you see things more clearly. His eyes narrowed slightly, but he said nothing, taking a sip of his wine. Alina gathered her courage. "Mr. Waltham," she began, her voice steady despite her nerves, "there's something I'd like to discuss with you. About Leo." At the mention of the boy's name, Malcolm's demeanor shifted. His easy smile faded, replaced by a guarded expression. "What about him?" he asked, his tone suddenly cold. Alina hesitated, weighing her next words carefully. "I've noticed something unusual about him. Something I can't ignore." Malcolm's grip on his glass tightened. "Leo is my son, Miss Marshall," he said firmly. "Whatever you think you've noticed, I assure you, it's none of your concern." Before Elena could respond, Mr. Howard appeared, his expression neutral but his presence clearly intentional. "Sir, a matter requires your attention inside." Malcolm gave Elena one last, piercing look before turning and walking away. Elena stood in the garden, her hands clenched at her sides. It was clear that Malcolm Waltham was hiding something. But if he thought she would back down, he was sorely mistaken. She wasn't just fighting for answers anymore. She was fighting for her son. The secrets within. The days following Elena's near confrontation with Malcolm Waltham were fraught with tension. Every time she stepped into a room, she could feel eyes on her. The staff, though polite, seemed to watch her with suspicion, their conversations quieting when she passed. Mr. Howard, ever the sentinel of the Waltham family's secrets, had taken to appearing unexpectedly, his gaze sharp and unyielding. But none of it deterred her. If anything, it strengthened her resolve. She needed more proof, something undeniable that would connect Leo to her, something Malcolm couldn't refute. She decided the next step was to dig deeper into the Waltham estate itself. Surely, in a house this old, secrets didn't just live in people, they lived in its very walls. Late one night, Elena found herself in the attic, a sprawling space filled with the remnants of generations past. Dust motes danced in the moonlight streaming through a small circular window. Old trunks, stacks of yellowed newspapers, and forgotten heirlooms were scattered haphazardly. She ran her fingers over the edge of a wooden chest, coughing as a cloud of dust rose. She hadn't expected to find much here, maybe old family photos, records of the estate's construction, but her heart skipped a beat when she stumbled across a stack of boxes labeled Private Family Archives. The handwriting was old and faded, but the label was clear. Elena hesitated. If these archives belonged to the Waltham family, snooping through them could mean immediate dismissal. But as she thought of Leo's face, his laughter echoing through the halls, she couldn't stop herself. This wasn't just about curiosity anymore. It was about the truth. She opened the first box cautiously. Inside, she found old letters and journals. Most of them were mundane. Family correspondence, notes about estate management. But as she sifted through them, something caught her eye. A thin file folder buried at the bottom bore the name Mark Atwell. Elena froze. She didn't recognize the name, but something about it felt significant. Slowly, she opened the folder. Inside was a birth certificate, and her breath caught as she read the details. Name: Aaron Marshall. Date of birth: August 15. Mother: Elena Marshall. Father: unknown. Amendments: name legally changed to Leonard Waltham. February 19. Her hands trembled as she clutched the document. It wasn't just proof. It was the connection she'd been searching for. Her son had been renamed, his identity erased to fit into this new life. She quickly flipped through the other papers in the folder, finding court documents that referenced her son's supposed death, signed by a judge she'd never met. Her mind raced. Someone had gone to great lengths to orchestrate this deception. The Walthams hadn't just adopted her son. They had stolen him, erasing his past and making it nearly impossible for her to find him. The weight of the discovery crushed her, but her determination burned brighter. She had the evidence now. She could confront Malcolm. She could reclaim Aaron. The next morning, as the staff bustled about their duties, Elena went through the motions like a ghost. Every interaction felt like a performance, her mind consumed by the revelations of the night before. She couldn't afford to act out of turn. Malcolm was too powerful, and she had seen firsthand how quickly he could shut her down. She needed a plan. That evening, as Leo played in the garden under the watchful eyes of his tutor, Elena took a calculated risk. She approached Mr. Howard in the library, her hands trembling but her voice steady. "Mr. Howard," she began, "may I have a word?" He looked up from the ledger he was reviewing, his expression unreadable. "Of course, Miss Marshall. What is it?" Elena hesitated. "I've been meaning to ask." "Leo," He's an exceptional boy. Bright, kind, full of life. But I can't help but notice there's something different about him." Mr. Howard's eyes narrowed slightly, his posture stiffening. "Different? How so?" "There are things he says, little details about his past, that don't seem to add up." She met his gaze, her heart pounding. "Is there something I should know?" For a moment, Mr. Howard didn't speak. The silence between them stretched, heavy and charged. Then, finally, he sighed and closed the ledger. "You're very perceptive, Miss Marshall," he said, his tone cautious. "But I would advise you to leave well enough alone. The Waltham family's affairs are complicated, and prying into matters that don't concern you can have consequences." "Mr. Howard," Elena said, her voice firm despite her fear, "this isn't just about the Waltham family. It's about Leo. If there's something about his past that's being hidden, don't you think he deserves to know? Don't you think he has a right to the truth?" Mr. Howard's expression softened, just for a moment, but it was enough. He sighed again, his shoulders slumping slightly. "You care for the boy," he said quietly. "That much is clear. But be careful, Miss Marshall. Some truths are better left buried." That night, as the mansion settled into its usual quiet, Elena sat in her small room, staring at the folder she had retrieved from the attic. She knew she couldn't wait any longer. She needed to confront Malcolm directly, to demand answers. But she also knew she needed a backup plan. If Malcolm denied everything, she would need someone else to corroborate her story. Someone who could challenge the Waltham family's power. Elena's mind raced. The legal documents she had found referenced a lawyer, a man named Benjamin Carter. If she could find him, perhaps he could help her untangle the web of lies surrounding her son's adoption. Her plan was set. First, she would confront Malcolm. If he refused to cooperate, she would take her evidence to Benjamin Carter, and, if necessary, to the authorities. As the clock struck midnight, Elena lay awake, staring at the ceiling. The mansion was full of secrets, but she was determined to bring them into the light. No matter the cost, she would fight for Aaron, for Leo, for the truth. The next morning, Elena stood outside Malcolm Waltham's study, her heart hammering in her chest. The folder clutched in her hand felt like both a weapon and a shield. She raised her hand to knock, but before she could, the door swung open. Malcolm stood there, his sharp blue eyes narrowing as he saw her. "Miss Marshall," he said coolly, "to what do I owe this intrusion?" "I need to speak with you," Elena said, her voice steadier than she expected. "It's about Leo." Malcolm's jaw tightened. "I don't think this is inappropriate." "I have proof," she interrupted, holding up the folder. "Proof that Leo isn't who you say he is. Proof that he's my son." The color drained from Malcolm's face, but his expression quickly hardened. "Come in," he said tersely, stepping aside to let her pass. As she entered the study, the weight of what she was about to do settled on her shoulders. But she refused to back down. This was her chance to uncover the truth and to fight for the son she had lost. A confrontation of truths. The air inside Malcolm Waltham's study was thick with tension as Elena stepped inside, clutching the folder that held the damning evidence. The room, lined with bookshelves and accented with a grand mahogany desk, radiated power and authority. But Elena refused to let herself be intimidated. She was here for one reason, and one reason only, her son. Malcolm closed the door behind her with a deliberate slowness, the lock clicking into place like a warning. He moved to his desk, his commanding presence filling the room as he sat down, and gestured for her to speak. "Well, Miss Marshall," he said, his voice cool and sharp, "you've clearly gone to great lengths to bring this matter to my attention. I'm listening." Elena hesitated for a fraction of a second, but the thought of Leo, her Aaron, strengthened her resolve. She placed the folder on his desk and slid it toward him. "Explain this," she said, her voice steady. Malcolm's eyes flickered to the folder, his jaw tightening. He opened it with deliberate care, as if buying time, and began to leaf through the documents. His expression remained unreadable, but the tightening of his hands around the papers betrayed his unease. "Where did you find this?" he asked, his tone low and dangerous. "In the attic," Elena replied without hesitation. "You've been hiding the truth, Malcolm. That boy you call Leo is my son, Aaron Marshall." Malcolm's eyes snapped up to meet hers, the steel in his gaze piercing. "You have no idea what you're talking about." "I know exactly what I'm talking about," Elena countered, leaning forward. "These documents prove that Leo is my son. His name was changed, his identity erased, and I was made to believe he was dead. Why? What could possibly justify stealing a child from his mother?" Malcolm's composure cracked, if only slightly. He leaned back in his chair, exhaling sharply. "This is far more complicated than you realize." "Then explain it to me," Elena demanded, her voice rising. "Help me understand why I've spent years mourning my son while you raised him as your own." For a moment, silence hung between them, heavy and suffocating. Malcolm's gaze dropped to the folder, his fingers tapping restlessly on the desk. Finally, he spoke. "You weren't supposed to find out," he admitted, his voice quieter now. "The truth was buried for a reason." Elena's breath hitched. What reason? What possible reason could justify this? Malcolm hesitated, and for the first time, he looked almost remorseful. "Your son was brought to me under unusual circumstances," he began. "I didn't orchestrate the situation, but I made a decision to protect him." "Protect him?" Elena's voice trembled with anger. "Protect him from what?" Malcolm stood, turning to face the window. His broad shoulders seemed to sag under an invisible weight. "From the chaos that surrounded him. When I was approached about adopting Leo, Aaron, his situation was described as dire. His father had debts with dangerous people. Your family was on the verge of collapse. I was told it was the only way to ensure his safety." Elena's heart sank as she processed his words. "So you believed it was better to take him from me, to let me believe he was gone?" "I didn't know the full truth then," Malcolm admitted, turning back to her. "By the time I realized what had been done, it was too late. Leo had already become a part of my family. I couldn't undo it without causing more harm." "Harm to who?" Elena demanded. "To me. To him. You talk about protecting him. But all you did was take away his mother. You stole years we'll never get back." Malcolm's expression hardened again. "I gave him a life you never could have, Elena. A life of privilege and opportunity." "Privilege doesn't replace love," she shot back. "And opportunity means nothing without the truth." Their heated exchange was interrupted by the sound of the door creaking open. Both turned to see Leo standing in the doorway, his small frame silhouetted by the hallway light. His wide eyes darted between them, his expression a mix of confusion and fear. "What's going on?" he asked, clutching his stuffed elephant tightly. Elena's heart broke at the sight of him. She wanted nothing more than to run to him, to hold him and tell him everything, but she knew she had to tread carefully. "Leo," Malcolm said, his voice suddenly gentle, "this is a private conversation." "No," Elena interjected, her voice soft but firm. "He deserves to hear this." "Elena," Malcolm began, but she held up a hand to stop him. "No more lies," she said. "Not to him, not to me." She knelt down to Leo's level, her voice trembling as she spoke. "Leo, there's something you need to know. Something I should have told you the moment I found out." Leo looked at her, his grip tightening on the elephant. "What is it?" Tears welled in Elena's eyes, but she forced herself to speak. "I'm your mother, Leo. Your real mother." Leo froze, his brow furrowing in confusion. "What do you mean?" "Dad said. He said my mom." "I know," Elena said gently, her voice cracking. "I know what you've been told, but it wasn't true. You were taken from me when you were little, and I've been searching for you ever since." Leo took a step back, shaking his head. "No, that doesn't make sense." "Dad." Malcolm stepped forward, his face etched with regret. It's true, Leo. Alina is your biological mother. Leo's eyes filled with tears, his small frame trembling. But why? Why did you lie to me? I thought I was doing what was best for you, Malcolm said, his voice heavy with emotion. I thought I was protecting you. You both lied, Leo shouted, tears streaming down his cheeks. You lied about everything. Alina reached out, but Leo pulled away. Leo, please. No, he yelled, running out of the room before either of them could stop him. Alina collapsed into the nearest chair, her hands covering her face as sobs racked her body. Malcolm stood silently by the window, his head bowed. The weight of their actions, their decisions, and their deceptions hung heavy in the air. We need to fix this, Alina said finally, her voice hoarse. We need to fix this for him. Malcolm nodded, his expression grim. For Leo. But as Alina looked at the man who had taken so much from her, she couldn't help but wonder, could they ever truly repair the damage they had done? Could they give Leo the truth and the love he deserved without tearing his world apart? She didn't have the answers, but she knew one thing for certain. She wouldn't stop fighting for her son. Not now. Not ever. Torn between two worlds. The echoes of Leo's footsteps as he ran down the mansion's marble halls seemed to linger in the silence that followed. Alina and Malcolm sat across from each other in the study, both grappling with the storm they had unleashed. For years, the lies had been a wall between them and the truth. Now that wall was crumbling, leaving a wreckage neither of them knew how to navigate. Alina broke the silence first, her voice low but firm. I need to go to him. He's confused, scared. He deserves answers. Malcolm nodded reluctantly, the weight of his guilt evident in his drawn features. Give him some space, Alina. Let him process this. She stood, her jaw tight. Space won't heal the damage we've done. He needs reassurance. He needs to know he's loved. Without waiting for a response, she left the study and followed the sound of quiet sobs. They led her to the garden, where Leo was crouched by the rose bushes, his stuffed elephant clutched tightly to his chest. His small shoulders trembled as he cried into his hands. Alina's heart broke at the sight. She approached cautiously, kneeling a few feet away so as not to startle him. Leo, she said softly, her voice trembling. I'm so sorry. He looked up, his tear-streaked face filled with confusion and hurt. Why did you lie to me? He asked, his voice barely a whisper. Why did everyone lie? Alina swallowed the lump in her throat. Because the adults in your life thought they were doing what was best for you, but we were wrong. I was wrong to wait so long to tell you the truth. Leo hugged his elephant tighter, his brow furrowed. You're really my mom. Yes, Alina said, her voice steady despite the tears streaming down her face. I carried you in my belly for 9 months. I was there for your first steps, your first words. You used to fall asleep in my arms every night while I sang to you. Leo's lip quivered. The song about the stars. Yes, Alina said, her voice breaking. The one about the stars. I thought I lost you forever, Leo. But now that I found you, I promise I'll never leave you again. Leo didn't respond immediately. He stared down at the ground, his little hands clutching the stuffed elephant. Finally, he whispered, But what about Dad? He's been my dad my whole life. Does that mean he's not my real dad? Alina hesitated, her heart aching for her son's confusion. Malcolm loves you, Leo. That's real. Being a parent isn't just about blood. It's about love, care, and showing up for you every day. He's been your dad in so many ways. Then why did he lie? Leo asked, looking up at her with tear-filled eyes. She reached out tentatively, placing a gentle hand on his shoulder. Because sometimes grown-ups make mistakes, even when they think they're doing the right thing. Malcolm thought he was protecting you, but keeping the truth from you wasn't fair. Leo stared at her for a long moment, his young mind trying to process the complexities of the situation. Finally, he leaned into her touch, his small body trembling as he whispered, I don't know what to do." Elena pulled him into her arms, holding him close as her tears fell into his curls. "You don't have to do anything, sweetheart. Just know that you're loved. By me, by Malcolm. We're both here for you." Later that evening, the Waltham mansion was uncharacteristically quiet. Malcolm found Elena sitting in the small library, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. She looked up as he entered, her face a mixture of exhaustion and determination. "How is he?" Malcolm asked, his voice softer than usual. "He's trying to understand," Elena replied. "He's hurt, Malcolm. We can't undo that. But we can make it right." Malcolm nodded, sinking into the chair across from her. He looked older than his years, the weight of his guilt etched into every line of his face. "I want to make this right, Elena. For Leo." She studied him for a moment, searching for any sign of insincerity. But all she saw was a man trying to atone for his mistakes. "Then we have to be honest with him, Malcolm. Completely honest. No more half-truths or omissions. He deserves to know everything." Malcolm exhaled slowly, his shoulders slumping. "You're right. But what if it's too much for him? He's only 7, Elena." "He's stronger than we think," she said. "But we need to give him space to feel what he's feeling. To ask questions, to be angry if he needs to be." Malcolm nodded, his jaw tightening. "I'll call Benjamin Carter tomorrow. He handled the adoption. He can help us figure out how to navigate this legally." "Legally?" Elena's voice rose, her eyes narrowing. "Malcolm, this isn't just about legalities. This is about a boy who's been torn between two worlds. We need to focus on his emotional well-being, not just paperwork." "I know," Malcolm said quickly, his tone conciliatory. I don't want him to feel like he's being pulled in two different directions. I want to make this transition as smooth as possible." Elena's gaze softened. "Then let's start by working together. For Leo." The next day, Malcolm gathered the courage to sit down with Leo. He found the boy in the living room, sitting on the floor with his toys scattered around him. Elena sat nearby, giving Leo space but staying close enough to offer support. Malcolm lowered himself to the floor, sitting cross-legged in front of Leo. For a moment, he simply watched his son, his bright, curious, vulnerable son, before speaking. "Leo," he began, his voice trembling slightly, "I need to tell you something. Something I should have told you a long time ago." Leo looked up at him, his expression wary but attentive. "I've always loved you, from the moment you came into my life," Malcolm continued. "But I wasn't honest with you about how you came to be here. Your real mom, Elena, she didn't give you up. You were taken from her." Leo's eyes widened. "What do you mean?" Malcolm took a deep breath. "When your father, your biological father, got into trouble, he made a decision that he thought would keep you safe. He brought you here, to me, and I adopted you. But in doing that, he made your mom believe you were gone forever." Leo looked at Elena, who nodded, tears streaming down her face. "I thought you were gone, sweetheart," she said. "For years, I thought I'd lost you. But I never stopped loving you. And I never stopped hoping I'd find you again." Leo's lip quivered, and he looked back at Malcolm. "Why didn't you tell me before?" "Because I was scared," Malcolm admitted, his voice breaking. "I was afraid of losing you, afraid of what the truth might do to you. But keeping it from you was wrong, and I'm so sorry." Leo was quiet for a long moment, his small hands gripping the hem of his shirt. Finally, he whispered, "I don't know who I'm supposed to be anymore." Malcolm's heart shattered. He reached out, placing a hand on Leo's shoulder. "You don't have to decide that right now, Leo. You're still you, the same smart, kind, amazing boy you've always been. And no matter what, you're loved. By me, and by your mom." Leo looked at both of them, his young face filled with uncertainty, but also a glimmer of hope. Can we all be together, like a real family?" Elena smiled through her tears. "We already are, sweetheart. We're just figuring it out, one step at a time." As Leo reached out, and took both their hands. Malcolm and Elena exchanged a glance. It wasn't going to be easy. There were still so many challenges ahead. But in that moment, they knew they had taken the first step toward healing. Together, building bridges. The weight of Leo's small hands in theirs was a grounding moment, a fragile bridge between the past and the uncertain future. Malcolm and Elena exchanged a look, silently agreeing to put aside their differences for the boy who had been at the center of their shared pain and love. "Can I ask something?" Leo's voice was tentative as he glanced up at them. His big, curious eyes darted between Malcolm and Elena. "If I was taken, why didn't anyone tell me before? Why did I have to find out like this?" Elena's throat tightened, but she forced herself to respond. "Because grown-ups don't always make the right decisions, Leo," she said gently. "We thought we were protecting you, but we were wrong. We didn't realize how much the truth mattered until now." Malcolm cleared his throat, his usual commanding demeanor softened by guilt. "Leo, I made a mistake. I should have told you the truth a long time ago. I thought I was protecting you, but I see now that I was only protecting myself." Leo studied his father, his brows knitting together in confusion. "So, you're not my real dad." Malcolm's voice cracked as he answered, "I may not be your biological father, but I'll always be your dad. That will never change." Elena's hand tightened around Leo's, her voice firm yet warm. "And I'll always be your mom, sweetheart. You don't have to choose between us. We both love you, and we're going to figure this out together." That evening, the three of them sat in the kitchen around a small table, the grand dining room forgotten for the intimacy of the moment. Malcolm had suggested they cook dinner together, a way to bond and bring some normalcy to the chaos. Leo sat on a stool, carefully peeling carrots while Elena stirred a pot on the stove. Malcolm, awkward in the kitchen but eager to participate, fumbled with a knife as he tried to chop onions. "You're doing it wrong," Leo said with a small smile, watching Malcolm's uneven cuts. "Oh, really?" Malcolm teased, raising a brow. "And what makes you the expert?" "I learned from Chef Marie," Leo replied proudly. "She said if you don't cut them evenly, they'll cook weird." Malcolm chuckled, setting down the knife. "Well, I suppose I'll leave the expert work to you then." Elena couldn't help but smile as she watched them. For the first time since the truth had come out, there was a sense of ease between them, a glimpse of the family they could become. As they sat down to eat, Leo looked around the table, his small face contemplative. "This feels different," he said suddenly. "Different how?" Elena asked. "Like, we're all together." "Like a family," he said quietly, his eyes flickering with hope. Elena reached out to squeeze his hand. "That's because we are, Leo." Malcolm nodded, his voice soft. "We are." Later that night, Elena tucked Leo into bed, sitting on the edge of the mattress as she smoothed his hair back. The dim light from the bedside lamp cast a warm glow across his face, and she marveled at how much he resembled the baby she had once held in her arms. "Mom," Leo said hesitantly, his voice small. "Yes, sweetheart," she replied, her heart swelling at the sound of him calling her that. "Do you think my dad, my other dad, would have liked this? Us being together?" Tears stung her eyes, but she nodded. "I think he would have been happy knowing you're loved, Leo. That's all any parent wants for their child." Leo seemed to think about this for a moment before snuggling deeper into his blankets. "Will you stay until I fall asleep?" "Of course," Elena said, leaning down to kiss his forehead. She began to hum softly, the lullaby she used to sing to him when he was a baby. His eyes fluttered closed, his breathing evening out as sleep claimed him. When she finally left the room, she found Malcolm waiting in the hallway, his hands shoved into his pockets. "Is he okay?" he asked, his voice filled with concern. Elena nodded, wiping at her eyes. "He's doing better than I expected, but it's going to take time." Malcolm sighed, leaning against the wall. "I don't know if I'll ever forgive myself for what I've done, Elena. I didn't just fail you. I failed him." You made mistakes, Alina said, her voice calm but firm. But you also gave him a home when he needed one. That doesn't erase the hurt, but it matters. Malcolm looked at her, his expression raw. I want to do better. For him. For all of us. Then let's start by being honest, Alina said. With him, with each other. No more secrets. Malcolm nodded, a flicker of determination in his eyes. No more secrets. The next morning, Leo woke to find a small envelope on his bedside table. Inside was a photograph of Alina holding him as a baby, her face glowing with love. On the back was a handwritten note. My dearest Leo, this is where your story began, with love. No matter what happens, always remember that you are loved more than words can ever say. Love always, Mom. Leo clutched the photo to his chest, a small smile tugging at his lips. For the first time since the truth had been revealed, he felt a little less lost. He had two parents who loved him, and while it was still confusing and messy, it was a start. A new chapter was unfolding, one where love and truth could finally coexist. And for Leo, that was enough. For now. The road to healing. The weeks that followed were a whirlwind of adjustment and delicate conversations. Life at the Waltham estate no longer carried the same glossy veneer of perfection. The truth had cracked the foundation of carefully constructed lies, leaving Malcolm, Alina, and Leo to rebuild their relationships from the rubble. For Leo, each day was a balancing act. He adored Malcolm, the only father he'd ever known, but the revelation that Alina was his biological mother had opened a door to a part of himself he didn't yet understand. At 7 years old, he was grappling with questions about identity and belonging that even adults struggle to answer. One crisp autumn morning, Alina and Leo sat in the garden planting tulip bulbs. The sun cast a golden glow over the estate, and the air carried the scent of earth and falling leaves. Alina gently guided Leo's small hands as he pressed a bulb into the soil. Will they really grow by spring? Leo asked, tilting his head to look at her. They will, Alina replied, smiling. But it takes patience. You have to water them, give them sunlight, and trust they'll bloom when the time is right. Leo was quiet for a moment, his gaze fixed on the freshly planted bulbs. Is that like us? Like how we're trying to grow as a family? Alina's breath caught. Yes, sweetheart. It's just like that. Inside the mansion, Malcolm sat in his study, staring at the stack of papers on his desk. Legal documents, custody agreements, things he had never thought he'd need to revisit. Benjamin Carter, the lawyer who had handled Leo's adoption, sat across from him. The man's once confident demeanor had been replaced by visible discomfort. I did what I was asked, Malcolm, Carter said, his voice defensive. Mark was desperate. He insisted this was the only way to keep Leo safe. And yet you didn't think to question the ethics of faking a death certificate. Malcolm snapped, his frustration boiling over. Do you realize what that did to her? To Alina. Carter shifted in his seat. I was following Mark's wishes. He trusted you to give Leo a better life. Mark was dying. Malcolm said, his voice quieter now, tinged with regret. He wasn't thinking clearly. But I had no excuse. I should have told Alina the truth from the beginning. So what now? Carter asked. Malcolm leaned back in his chair, exhaling slowly. Now, I make it right. Alina and I have agreed to co-parent Leo. She deserves to be part of his life, and I won't stand in the way of that. Carter nodded, relief washing over his face. It's the right thing to do. Later that evening, the three of them gathered in the grand living room for a family movie night. Leo had chosen a nature documentary about butterflies, a subject that had fascinated him since he was little. He sat between Alina and Malcolm, his head resting on Alina's shoulder as the film played. At one point, the narrator explained how butterflies undergo a complete transformation in their chrysalis, emerging as something entirely new. Leo looked up at Alina, his eyes wide. Mom, do you think I'm like a butterfly, changing into something new? Alina smiled, brushing a strand of hair from his face. "I think you're growing, Leo. Becoming the person you're meant to be. And just like a butterfly, you're already beautiful." Malcolm reached over, placing a hand on Leo's knee. "And no matter what, you'll always have us to help you through it." Leo looked between them, a small smile spreading across his face. For the first time in weeks, he felt a sense of peace. The next day, Alina suggested an outing to Franklin Park, the place she had once taken Leo as a baby. Malcolm hesitated at first, worried it might stir up too many emotions, but he ultimately agreed. It was time to create new memories. The park was just as Alina remembered it. The same towering oak trees, the same pond where ducks swam lazily, the same swings where she had once pushed Leo as a toddler. As they walked along the path, Leo's eyes lit up with curiosity. "Did I really come here when I was little?" he asked. "You did," Alina said, her voice soft. "You loved the swings. You used to giggle so much that everyone would stop to watch you." Leo ran ahead to the swing set, his laughter carrying on the breeze. Alina and Malcolm followed, their steps falling into an easy rhythm. "You're good with him," Malcolm said after a moment of silence. "So are you," Alina replied. "He's lucky to have you in his life." "I just hope I haven't caused too much damage," Malcolm said, his voice heavy with regret. "We can't change the past," Alina said gently, "but we can choose what we do moving forward. And as long as we put Leo first, we'll be okay." Malcolm nodded, a flicker of hope crossing his face. "You're right. He's what matters." As the weeks turned into months, the new family dynamic began to settle. There were challenges, moments of confusion and tears, moments of frustration and doubt. But there were also moments of joy. Shared meals, bedtime stories, and quiet evenings in the garden became the new normal. One night, as Malcolm and Alina sat together on the terrace watching Leo chase fireflies, Malcolm turned to her. "Thank you," he said quietly. "For what?" Alina asked. "For forgiving me. For giving me the chance to be part of this. Part of his life." Alina smiled, her gaze fixed on Leo. "We're all part of his life, Malcolm. And that's what makes this work." Leo's laughter echoed through the night as he ran across the lawn, a jar in his hand to catch the glowing insects. In that moment, under the starry sky, the three of them felt something they hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. It wasn't perfect, and it wasn't easy, but it was theirs. And together, they were building something stronger than the lies and pain that had once divided them. They were building a family. A new dawn. The days at the Waltham estate grew lighter, the once imposing walls now filled with the warmth of shared moments and tentative healing. Leo adjusted to his new reality with remarkable resilience, though the questions never truly stopped. He wanted to know about the family he'd lost, the family he'd gained, and the decisions that had shaped his young life. One evening, as the sun dipped low in the sky, casting a golden hue over the garden, Leo sat on a picnic blanket with Malcolm and Alina. They had made a habit of these moments, taking time to connect as a family. A pitcher of lemonade and a plate of cookies sat between them, untouched, as Leo examined an old photo album Alina had brought from her modest apartment. "This was your first birthday," Alina said, pointing to a photo of a chubby-cheeked baby smashing a cake with his tiny hands. "You loved the frosting more than the cake." Leo giggled, his finger tracing the picture. "I don't remember that." "That's okay," Alina said softly. "We'll make new memories to go with the old ones." Malcolm, who had been quiet for much of the evening, finally spoke. "Leo, do you know what I see when I look at you?" "What?" Leo asked, tilting his head. "I see someone who's strong, kind, and smart. You've been through so much, but you've handled it better than most adults would," Malcolm said. "You're an amazing kid, and I'm proud of you every single day." Leo's cheeks flushed, and he ducked his head shyly. "Thanks, Dad. And I see someone who's brave," Alina added. "Someone who asks questions, even when the answers are hard to hear." That's a special kind of strength, Leo. Leo looked at both of them, his young face filled with a mixture of gratitude and awe. I think I'm lucky to have two parents who care about me so much. Malcolm and Elena exchanged a glance, their unspoken understanding stronger than ever. They were far from perfect, but they were united in their love for Leo. A few weeks later, Leo came home from school with an idea. During dinner, as they sat around the table, he set down his fork and cleared his throat. "I've been thinking," he began, his small voice steady. "Maybe we can plant a family tree." "A family tree?" Elena asked, her brow furrowing in curiosity. "Yeah," Leo said, his face lighting up. "Like in the garden. We can plant it together, and it can be our special tree." Malcolm smiled, setting his glass down. "I think that's a wonderful idea, Leo." The next Saturday, the three of them gathered in the garden with a young sapling, a sturdy maple tree that would grow tall and strong. Malcolm dug the hole, while Elena held the tree steady and Leo patted the soil into place. As they worked, Leo spoke about the meaning behind the tree. "It'll remind us that even if our family is different, it's still growing, and the roots are strong." When the tree was finally planted, Malcolm handed Leo a small plaque. "I had this made," he said, his voice thick with emotion. Leo read the inscription aloud. "Our family tree, rooted in love, grown with truth." Tears welled in Elena's eyes as Leo knelt to place the plaque at the base of the tree. The three of them stood back, admiring their work. The tree was small now, but they could all see its potential, its promise of a future built together. The seasons change, and so did the family. Elena found a rhythm in her role as Leo's mother, balancing her time between the Waltham estate and her modest apartment, which she kept as a reminder of where she'd come from. Malcolm learned to share his place in Leo's life, becoming not just a father but a partner in co-parenting. And Leo thrived, his world richer for the love and honesty that now surrounded him. One evening, as they sat together on the terrace watching the sunset, Leo looked at them and smiled. "We're a good team," he said, his voice full of certainty. Malcolm chuckled. "The best." Elena reached over to ruffle Leo's hair. "And we'll always be a team, no matter what." As the sky turned from gold to deep purple, the three of them sat in comfortable silence, the weight of the past no longer a burden but a part of the story that had brought them together. They didn't have all the answers, and they knew there would still be challenges ahead. But for the first time, they felt truly whole. Their family, once fractured, was now rooted in something stronger than lies or loss. It was rooted in love, truth, and the promise of a future they would build together, one step, one day, one season at a time. And in the heart of the garden, their family tree stood tall, its roots growing deeper with every passing moment.